Last week, I actually covered this story in brief. The Vatican has given a prayer space to members of a religion who openly talk about conquering Rome, hoisting their crescent moon flag over the Vatican, and essentially oppressing all Christianity and stomping the faith out. They talk about this openly, and so naturally, the Vatican's attitude is, hey, let's give these guys a prayer room in the Vatican. Can't make this stuff up. And you're wondering why I'm covering this again. It's because suddenly the secular media is asking a few questions about this, and they reached out to Vatican officials about why. And then the story got worse when the Vatican answered why. But the other reason is, if you want to know why this is happening, it's because Pope Leo is continuing the work of Pope Francis. He has said as much numerous times, repeatedly. I get the feeling that just now people are starting to believe him. Be that as it may, there's an underlying mission that Francis had, and it definitely continues today, and that is ecumenical dialogue, as I call it, or ecumenical dialogue. Essentially, not just conversing with members of other religions to show them the light of Christ, to answer their questions and clear up misconceptions and all the rest of the things one needs to do when speaking with somebody who doesn't share the faith, so you can get them to come into the church, right? There are certain things you need to do. But that's not why they're doing it. They have a sort of lukewarm idea of the faith and believe that Christ is merely the privileged path to salvation. They have said this themselves publicly. And if you want a good example of this, I will start here. This was posted by Stephen Cox on his X account. He is interviewing Father Michael Mary FSSR. I covered their letter last week in a live stream. I have another thing about that probably tomorrow on this channel, so keep an eye out. But this priest here is a religious priest who is explaining why it is his organization, his monastery, have essentially declared that they're not going to submit to the new synodal church in Rome. And it's a very short clip, and it gives you an idea of why we're talking about what we are today.
Well, some people say he hasn't had enough time. But I don't say that. I think it's time to come in the first day. Like Mr. Trump, when he gets in to be the president, he has the first 100 days and he's sitting at his desk and he's signing off all of these things one after another because he's in charge of the country and he's making executive orders left, right, and center. I would expect that from the Pope. First day, first 100 days, I expect all of this stuff to be thrown out. Fiducia supplicans, amoris laetitia, the Dubai agreement, all of this stuff can't remain inside the sacred magisterium of the church. It's unworthy. Well, some people say he has.
And you get the idea. Where is he wrong? Where is the lie? If the Pope was going to undo the things Francis did, he would have done so already. He's only undone one thing, and that was a managerial administrative decision on the relationship with the Vatican Bank. And even then, it wasn't that big of a change, because the Pope gave an address on usury recently, talked about how usury is bad. No one disagrees with that. Even the modernists agree with the traditional Catholics on usury being bad. But if they wanted to do something about usury, they would have abolished the Vatican Bank. They would have contracted with the most trusted, scrutinized bank in Italy, whoever that is, or Switzerland, or some other place, somebody who has a track record of ethical handling of finances, and would have had them handle it. But instead, they just undid some of the things Francis did and are hoping for the best, and that's what it seems to be. But on this prayer room story, the secular media is asking questions. So we're going to lead here with this article from DallasExpress.com. This is not exactly a rad trad Catholic news website. Under the headline, and we have to be careful with this topic because you're not allowed to offend the sensibilities of that group at all on social media. But the headline is, why is there a Ottoman prayer room in the Vatican Apostolic Library? And I will just tell you, this is incredible, because the answer you get to this question, they asked the question of Vatican library officials, and they got an answer from them. That's the amazing thing here. Let's go right to this. The Vice Prefect of the Apostolic Library, Father Giacomo Cardinali, confirmed to the Italian media that the room, equipped with a new prayer rug, was created following requests from redacted researchers who regularly access the library's resources at the Vatican. Of course, some of their scholars have asked us for a room with a carpet to pray, and we have given it to them, said the Cardinal, per Zenit. Zenit is a Catholic news outlet. Cardinali would then go on to say that the Vatican's library is still, quote, the most secular of all Vatican institutions. Let me repeat that for you. Cardinali would then go on to say that the Vatican's library is still, quote, the most secular of all Vatican institutions, referring to it as a humanistic institution. Founded in 1475 by Pope Sixtus IV, the Vatican Library holds tens of thousands of manuscripts, over 1.6 million printed books, and a huge array of ancient or rare texts, including ancient Arabic manuscripts, Hebrew books, rare Ethiopian works, and one of the oldest Japanese manuscript archives outside of Japan itself. The library limits physical access to about 60 qualified scholars per day. However, its ongoing digitization project has made significant portions of its collections now more widely available online, also helping to reinforce its role as a global hub for academic research. Now, the new Ottoman prayer room will align with Pope Leo XIV's focus on interfaith dialogue, building off some similar leanings with the legacy of his predecessor, Pope Francis. Francis had previously written about building understanding between faiths, specifically that one. And it goes on, like that. It's the most secular of all institutions. Okay, then. Now, the Vatican Library, it's the subject of a lot of conspiracy theories and things. People who tend to think there's all sorts of deep, dark secrets hidden in the Vatican Library probably read too many Dan Brown novels. I actually know people who've been to the Vatican Library. They say if that's what you're looking for in the Vatican Library, you're looking in the wrong place. It's like they tell me it's one of the least interesting places, unless you are an academic researcher of some kind. But it's one of the least interesting places if you're looking for some of the darker secrets of the Vatican. But this does beg a question. We're seeing room made for this. But in the day-to-day life of the church, Catholics who just want the same identifiable faith as their ancestors, we're told to go pound sand, basically. This comes from Catholic Unscripted, which is Mark Lambert's blog. He posted this. I'll have links to this at the Anthony Stine Substack today, later on in the morning. Check it out if you want to read the full thing. But his headline is "Room for the false worship of the crescent moon at the Vatican. No room for tradition. The Holy See opens its doors to their devotion while sidelining its own liturgical inheritance." Now, the easy response to this from some people will be, well, what do you mean it's sidelining it? Cardinal Burke's about to say a traditional mass here any day now. True. But we're getting nothing but bad news stories about TLM suppressions around the West. There was as an aside, a story broke yesterday out of Ohio that a bishop there offered the expansion of the traditional mass. Not the expansion, but the expansion of the timeline that was allowed for. He was granted a 2-year extension from Rome. A couple of days ago, before the story broke, I was actually given a tip that was coming from a parishioner who had heard the announcement at Mass. But they didn't send any documentation, so I didn't really do anything with it. But then this story broke in the Catholic media that this diocese was given a 2-year extension. And so I sent them the article asking if it was the same parish. And they said yes, but they got details in the article wrong. But here's the kicker. Not reported in any of the media reporting, according to the parishioner who was there, was that 2-year extension came with the caveat of that the laity must be taught about how great the traditional mass is in preparation for them to return to the wonderful Novus Ordo Missae. Okay, so when Mark Lambert says there's no room for tradition, that is what he's talking about. On this move about the prayer room for that group, here's what he has to say. Tell me where he's wrong. Quote, "It seems to me that this is another one of those moves that seem, at least to the general population, as respectful and benign. A major Catholic institution opens its doors to scholars of other faiths and accommodates their devotional needs. That could be and probably is seen as commendable by anyone who doesn't agree with the Catholic Church's unique and specific claims. Yet for many faithful Catholics, particularly those attached to a strong, unembarrassed sense of the Church's promotion of objective truth, the move raises deeper and more uncomfortable questions. Why is this accommodation happening in the heart of the Catholic Church? What is its significance in light of the Church's teaching on truth, worship, and her own identity? And what does it imply that while this accommodation is extended to Ottomans, the traditional Latin Mass, the very form of worship offered by saints such as St. Josemaria Escriva, St. Padre Pio, St. Thomas More, and St. Maximilian Kolbe, has been steadily restricted and often treated as an unwelcome presence. In other words, in plainer language, they have greater tolerance for those outside the Catholic faith than they do inside the Catholic faith. That itself is a scandal. Now, speaking of scandals, minutes before I went live this morning, I saw that Taylor Marshall had posted this article, what you're about to see on X. You might be aware, the German bishops have been at the forefront of rejecting what the Church has to say on the nature of the sacraments. Their synodal way makes the Synod on Synodality look like the Council of Trent. That's how radical it is compared to the Synod on Synodality, and the Synod on Synodality is a hot mess. It's a heretical hot mess. But now we're getting some insight into why the bishops are all practically unified in one voice in an effort to reject the sacraments, to say that the Church didn't get the James Martin sin right, that the Church was wrong to call for a celibate clergy. Celibate clergy goes back to apostolic times. I know there were examples of married priests, but the default was celibacy. And a real scholar will tell you that, yes, the Church had married clergy in the West until 1,000 years ago, but it's been gone for 1,000 years, which means it's part of the capital T tradition. That's Catholicism 101 stuff. But apparently, at least one bishop in Germany is leading a double life. And I don't mean a double life like Ted McCarrick or Maciel or something like that. Thankfully, he's not doing that. But he has violated his vows completely. And he did it in a way that's going to force the Church to address this. The headline is from the Catholic Herald. German bishop admits to a civil marriage while remaining ordained. How? How do you remain ordained in a civil marriage? It's a civil marriage is still sacramental. The Church isn't the one who administers the sacrament. The spouses, the would-be spouses, administer the sacrament to one another. It's the Church that witnesses and blesses and confirms the union, but it's still sacramental. So how is he doing this? This is going to force the Church's hand, which is exactly what the point of this was. This is why he not only did this, but then came out about it. The German missionary Bishop Reinhold Nahn has publicly acknowledged marrying a Peruvian woman, Peru, interesting, in a civil ceremony despite remaining ordained. In a statement given to the German Catholic news agency KNA, Bishop Nahn, aged 65 and formerly serving in the Archdiocese of Freiburg, admitted to civil marriage and blamed institutional failures for his decision. Nothing like not taking responsibility for your actions. The higher I climbed, the clearer the extent of the abysses, tragedies, abuse, mediocrity, and lies became to me. I saw too much, and it horrified and depressed me. I was becoming increasingly lonely and superficial. Notice he's basically saying the spotless bride of Christ is in fact not so spotless after all. He's accusing the Church of being a liar. You're not, I don't think you're a Catholic anymore when you start doing that stuff. Well, let's continue. Bishop Nahn's clerical career took him from working as a priest in Peru between 2002 and 2017 to his appointment in 2017 as bishop of the territorial prelature of Caravelli. He resigned the office in December 2024, notifying the Vatican and his home diocese, citing depression, stress, and high blood pressure, health issues he now says were intertwined with his developing relationship. In other words, his conscience was causing him health problems. Depression was the reason. Love was the cause, he told KNA. He added that following the COVID-19 pandemic, he fell in love with his partner, now publicly living with him. I'll say that again. Now publicly living with him. This is my shocked face. And described the Church's insistence on celibacy as, quote, desperately clinging, that he believes does far more harm than good. While the Vatican accepted his resignation from the prelature in 2024, Bishop Nahn has now admitted the true reason was his personal relationship, rather than the health grounds he initially gave publicly. So here, basically, what it is is the priest or the bishop married a woman, they're living together, and he did so civilly. And it's not a confirmed marriage in the church, so strictly speaking, it's still adultery. Hooray! Talk about scandal. There's a purpose to this. The purpose is to force the Pope's hand on this question. And I don't know where he stands on this. I don't know. Francis was clearly open to married priests. Talked about Viri Probati, if you remember that hot mess from the Amazon Synod, where they would find older married men whose children were grown and on their own to become priests to go minister to various groups in far off, extremely rural and even wild areas. But that was, of course, meant to open the door for a married clergy in the West. And now this bishop, by the way, for those who don't know, many will say, well, what's a big deal? There have been married priests in the East. Yeah, but there's no married bishops in the East. There's no tradition of married bishops. The last married bishops would have been the apostles, and they lived as brother and sister. So again, virtually every tradition says, every apostolic tradition in the church says, or even outside the Catholic Church, says if you're going to be married, you cannot be a bishop. This is meant to force the hand of the Pope. That's all it is. And I don't know if he's sympathetic to them. I'll show you a reason why I think he might be sympathetic, though. You may have seen this story in passing. Father Calvin Robinson, who is not a Catholic priest, should be a Catholic priest, and he's definitely hinted at wanting to be one. You've probably heard the story. The King Charles is going to visit the Pope and has been given a special title. It's going to have a chair at a specific cathedral where he'll be able to have a place of, he'll be given a place of honor during any masses said there, even though the man can't receive the Eucharist because he's not a Catholic. King Charles III will visit the Vatican and publicly pray with the Pope, a first for the British monarchy since the split from Rome. Pope Leo XIV has granted him the title of Royal Confrater of St. Paul, and a church in the Basilica inscribed Ut Unum Sint, pray for unity. Interesting move at the same time that the Church of Henry VIII just blew itself up by putting in Sarah Mullally as the Archbishopette of Canterbury, causing the Anglican Church to fracture. It's now a breakaway group calling itself the Real Anglican Church. This has to do, of course, with ecumenical dialogue and, well, dialogue especially at the expense of truth. It would be a wonderful thing if Henry VIII were to, or not Henry VIII, Charles III, rather, were to convert and come home, but it would, of course, force him to abdicate if he did. But what's more important? His claim to the throne or his soul? And we'll wrap this up today with this thought from Vigano on the Charles III situation. The meeting between the head of the Synodal Church and the head of the Church of England will culminate in an ecumenical prayer for the care of creation in the Sistine Chapel, under the banner of environmentalist rhetoric about the cry of the earth and ecological conversion. The two supreme authorities of their respective churches both identify with the environmentalist and neo-Malthusian ideology of the World Economic Forum and Agenda 2030, and it is on this new religion that the dialogue between the Synodals and Anglicans is based. Confirming its continuity with conciliar ecumenism, Leo will offer Charles a seat with the inscription Ut Unum Sint in the Basilica of St. Paul outside the walls, formerly the scene of the Convocation of Vatican II, and since then the temple of conciliar and synodal ecumenism. The great absentee is the Catholic faith, and not by chance. It would be embarrassing for Leo to remember the Catholic martyrs ended by the polygamous king, starting from John Fisher and Thomas More. Just imagine Pope Clement VII offering a seat in a papal basilica to Henry VIII. You cannot imagine that because it's too absurd to imagine. Only would that happen if Henry VIII had submitted to the authority of the Pope on the question of Catherine of Aragon and his marriage to her. But of course, that's not what happened. All of this belies that the truth is sacrificed and placed secondary to sentiment, to making people feel good about themselves. That is what accompaniment and dialogue without a call to conversion is. You're just walking together to feel good about yourselves. That's it. There's no call to conversion, except, of course, ecological conversion. I'm very curious what you have to say about this. Where does, you mean Archbishop Vigano, Craig asks, where does he hide out? He's in Italy. He has a religious order or a priestly fraternity, pretty controversial one that he founded in Italy. But that's where they are. We don't know precisely where, but that's where they are. But I'm very curious what you have to say about this. So please pray for everybody we talked about here today. That German bishop, and of course the Pope and the King of England and the rest, because the salvation of souls is the most important thing here. Nothing else. Let me know what you think about all this in the comments, please. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't. It does help. Sharing this on social media helps a lot too. If you've ever thought about helping out with the work we do here at Return to Tradition, options in the description box below, and that subscribe plus button. All those things help keep the daily messages coming and are greatly appreciated. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.